Great pleasure right now to welcome to the program author of a great new baseball book out called Game 6, Cincinnati, Boston, of the 1975 World Series, the triumph of America's pastime. We're joined by the New York Times bestselling author of previous books like The Match, Mark Frost. Today, Mark, thanks for being with us in Sarasota. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing great. And as a former New Yorker, Mark, I have to say, when I first heard it was about Game 6, the first game I had to think of was the '86 game between the Red Sox and the Mets. But this was the first Game 6 I think people think of, in 1975. A great topic to write about, I imagine.
Well, you know, there have been a lot of great Game 6s over the years. It seems to be a place in the series that lends itself to great drama. And I always felt that this particular Game 6 from the '75 series was the single greatest baseball game that I had ever seen. And something I've hung on to for so long. I knew I wanted to write about it someday.
Yeah, I think I remember watching some of it on TV, and of course it was kind of early, I guess one of the early World Series that had night games, wasn't it, 1975?
This was the first night game ever played at Pastime Park in the postseason, actually, and it lasted well into the following morning. It was a 12-inning affair that took until 1 o'clock the following day to resolve, and many people, myself included, think of it as the greatest single World Series game ever played.
And you look at the roster of the players in the game, going down from the Big Red Machine, of course, Johnny Bench, Pete Rose, and Tony Perez, and then on the Red Sox, the great players there, Luis Tiant, of course, Carl Yastrzemski, Hall of Famer, and Dewey Evans. You go down that list, and you look at baseball today, there are great players, but you don't see that types of lineups anymore in the game. So that was a great game just for lineup purposes.
I don't think you could find a single game today that's going to have 8 or 9 future Hall of Famers in it like this one did. Plus, you had Sparky Anderson, Hall of Fame manager, and even up in the broadcast booth, you had 3 former or future Hall of Famers, and Kurt Gowdy, Joe Garagiola, Tony Kubek. This was just a great event from every angle, and I tried to make you feel like you're inside Fenway Park for that night in October 1975.
I like how you set it up, kind of going back in history to some of the history of the Boston franchise and the Red Sox, the Reds franchise back in the late 1800s, and kind of give a perspective that way of those two teams, and then you go up to the present time. And, of course, those are the 2 oldest teams in baseball, aren't they?
Yeah, they're really, it's amazing how this game kind of ties together the very roots of the game, the very beginning of baseball. These are the 2 oldest franchises in all of professional baseball. And then there are 2 storied franchises that, kept that up for close to 100 years. So it was a great couple of organizations to write about, and obviously all these great players. It made it a real treat.
And one of my favorite pitchers I remember watching, of course, he went over to the Yankees later on, but great pitcher for the Red Sox for many years, Luis Tiant, and you kind of go back in his history and the history of Cuban baseball and how that kind of all tied into the rise of a lot of the Cuban and Hispanic players in the game. That was kind of interesting, I guess, to look back at, right?
That was. Tony Kubek told me that the whole move toward Latino players really started with Tony Perez and Luis Tiant, who were kind of, trailblazers in their own right in their respective leagues. And the 2 of them had never, although they were almost the same age, they'd grown up together in Cuba around the same time, they'd never played each other in this kind of contest in the major leagues. So it was interesting from that perspective, too, to see how the game has evolved. And it's always been sort of the face of America in a lot of ways, and certainly it reflected that as baseball has become that today.
And Tiant's career was thought to be over because he was, on Cleveland, I believe, before he went to the Red Sox, and Minnesota as well before that, I think, and kind of they thought of as a washed-up pitcher, wasn't he?
Well, yeah, he'd been a great starting pitcher for the Indians for about 5-6 years. He had an injury when he was traded to the Twins, and they really thought that his career was over. And the Red Sox kind of reclaimed him off the scrap heap, and within 2 years, he had become, once again, one of the most dominant pitchers in baseball. It was a testament to really his willpower and his desire to get back in the arena.
One of the great deliveries of all time. Nobody's ever come close to doing the way he had those hesitation moves. I guess it was a balk move, but
he's like a great jazz soloist. No one ever knew what he was going to do. He had about 6 different windups and about 4 different release points. So at any moment, you might get a pitch from any angle, and it might be any kind of pitch. He was a tremendous entertainer on the mound, and I really admired what he was able to do tremendously.
And every opposing manager, I think Sparky Anderson included, tried to get the umpires to call a balk on him, but they never did.
They did get one balk called on him early in this World Series, and Louis took it pretty personally, and they didn't do it again. That was something that Sparky thought he could use as a sort of a mind game against Louis, and it actually didn't work. So those things do happen in baseball.
You talk about in the book interesting background of Sparky Anderson, how he kind of was a player at one point, but never a great player, so he made his way into managing, and kind of the history of his becoming a manager. Can you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, Sparky had been, by his own terms, and his own admission, a very mediocre player himself. He'd been in the minors for about 9 years. He ended up playing one single season at second base for the Philadelphia Phillies, and knew he was never going to make it at that level, but wanted to stay in baseball, and reimagined himself as a manager, worked very hard through the minor league systems to get a major league opportunity, which he finally did in 1970 with the Reds. And that was the start of something great. He took over in 1970. The Reds went to the World Series that time for the first time with the Big Red Machine, and come 1975, this was their third trip, although they hadn't won it yet. In fact, Sparky was very nervous that if they didn't win this 1975 series, he was going to be out of a job. As great as that team had been, a manager's job is never secure.
No.
But when they finally were able to win in 75, their reputation and the future of Sparky as a great manager was finally assured.
He was one of those managers that, if you look at now, old school in one way, but he kind of adapted to the more modern athlete. And even though he was a taskmaster out there on the mound, he had strict rules. I think he let the players play, didn't he? Treated them like men.
He really did. He was a great leader, and the fact that he was able to do this again 5 years after he left the Reds with the Detroit Tigers is a real testament that it wasn't just a guy landing in the right place with a bunch of great players. He had great leadership skills, and he taught these guys how to play together as a team, put aside whatever their personal goals might be for the good of that team. And I think he's a wonderful example of what a manager should be, and is maybe a little neglected. I think he's one of the greatest managers of all time.
Talking with Mark Frost, and in the book is Game 6 about the 1975 World Series between the Reds and the Red Sox. Of course, all New England fans and any Red Sox fan in Red Sox Nation remembers Carlton Fisk with the home run. He makes his home at least part of the year down here in our area, Mark, in Sarasota, and there's a big following down here. But did you get a chance to talk to him about that particular home run for this particular book?
The way he behaved and reacted to that home run is one of the greatest things that I've ever seen in sports. It was one of the most remarkable moments we've ever seen in a baseball game. And if you look at those interviews afterwards, you see a young man who is so thrilled to be on that stage in that moment, to have won that game for the team he grew up admiring. If you ever go back and have a chance to see his interviews immediately after that game ended, it's one of the greatest things I've ever seen live as an athlete reacts to what they've done. Hedge is a great guy, and deservedly in the hearts of Red Sox fans, I think he'll live forever.
You talk about the Fisk home run, the shot that director Harry Coyle, who really basically invented how to televise baseball, particularly with that center field shot, and happened to have a camera on it from that side angle down, I guess, the third base line, where you see Fisk doing the motion of the hands there. I mean, that just goes down as one of the great, not only baseball moments, but TV moments, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's often been thought of as one of the most iconic moments ever in televised sports. And I'm sure everybody has seen the image of Fisk turning back into a 12-year-old little leaguer trying to will that ball to stay fair. It's something, once you see it, you'll never forget it. It's quite remarkable.
And Pete Rose, I think one point during the game, I'm not sure when it was, it had to be late in the game, I guess, maybe talking to somebody on base, and he said, aren't you glad that we're in this game and we're playing, or something like that. Didn't he say something to one of the players about that?
Pete was telling anybody who would listen from about the fifth inning on that this was the greatest game he'd ever been in, and he just didn't believe how wonderful it was to be in the World Series and playing a game like this. And afterwards, he didn't even seem to mind that much that they'd lost. He felt pretty confident they were going to win Game 7. And it was actually Pete's positive attitude that pulled Sparky Anderson out of a terrible funk, because he really thought that he had lost that game for his team. And it wasn't until Pete grabbed him afterwards and said, don't worry about it, Skip. We just played the greatest World Series game of all time, and we're going to win tomorrow, that Sparky began to believe it himself.
You definitely captured it, and just being a baseball fan and a sports fan, I brought me back to some of those great memories. It's called Game 6, Cincinnati-Boston, the 1975 World Series, the triumph of America's pastime. We've been talking with Mark Frost. Mark, appreciate you taking a few minutes. I know you've been doing a lot of these today, but I know our fans down here are going to be interested in the book. And you have a website you want to direct people to?
Well, yeah, my personal website is bymarkfrost.com. It's got all the books and movies and television stuff I've worked on over the years, and it's also a place where you can buy the book. The book is in bookstores, and it's available on Amazon. And if you've got a baseball fan in your family and you're looking for a good Christmas gift, it might just fill the bill.
Great. Mark, appreciate it. We'll hopefully talk to you down the road. Thanks for being with us today.
Great to be with you. Thanks a lot.